We'll start next week, and I'm going to bring Dave up in a minute. Dave's going to talk about next week's speaker. I'm not sure who it is, but he'll tell us all about it. So, I'm sure it will be a good presentation next week. And going on with today's presentation is our frequent speaker, Dave Walter. Dave has blessed us with many presentations. As you can see from the title slide, we have up 20 Civil War women. So he's going to tell us about their role in the Revolutionary War. The Civil War. I keep calling it Revolutionary War. Civil War.
You're a Southerner, it is.
So, but all too often, at least when I went to school, we didn't hear much about the role of women in the war. No matter which war it was, very little. So this will be very interesting to give us insight as to what they did. And with that, I'm going to open with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this glorious fall day. Thank you for the changing seasons. Guide us in enjoyment of them. And also remember as we reflect back on Sunday with the third graders getting their Bibles. Be with them as they really start to dive into your word through the Bibles that were given to them. Keep them encouraged at this young age and through their life. Ask that you be with all our members that are in need of your healing touch and grace and comfort. Just bless them and bless all those that are in the room today that will hear this presentation by Dave. And thank you for Dave doing the presentation, taking the time and resource energy to research to put this together to give us some more insight. Ask that you just be with our country as we go through some troubling times. Guide us in all that we do. Bless this day to all of us. Amen. Dave Goodell, would you come up and tell us about next week? Next week's presentation is by Dave. He won't have to introduce himself, so he's going to tell us about it.
So I don't recommend coming.
So if you want to sleep in late next Tuesday.
Take it. It's entitled, how is it entitled? Our Body, Soul, and Spirit, the Tripartite Nature, and how we can use the different parts of our bodies, souls, and spirits to elevate our chances of being spiritually successful and getting into heaven. Also, Betty Ann gave us 3. She's gotten new hearing aids, and she now has rechargeable hearing aids. And if anybody needs Duracell hearing aid number 13, these are free. And she's got 3 different sets, right? There's 2, yeah, 2 per package. And there's 3 packages here. So I'm going to leave them up here. If anybody needs them, please help yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Dave, for that intro to next week. And Dave, again, Dave Walter, if you would come up, give us a presentation on the women of the Civil War.
Yes.
I got that one remembered now, so I got it right. Huh? You're up.
Good morning, everyone. Ted said I've been here many times. I actually looked it up. This is my 14th presentation to this group. So we'll see hopefully many more. We tried to get the presentation in the middle screen and apparently technology failed. I know it's very hard to see from over there with the glare and everything. So, if you want to move or something. As Ted mentioned, as you read history, it's male centric. Women get ignored in a lot of our history. And that was certainly true in the Civil War. We tend to learn about Lincoln, about Generals Lee, Jackson, Grant, Sherman. We learn about the horrific battles. We see pictures that Brady took of the deaths at Antietam and places like that. And you've probably heard about Clara Barton, obviously, Belle Boyd, the famous Confederate spy. But let's face it, there were millions and millions of women, North and South, back on the home front that without them, the prosecution of the war would have been impossible. So I've dedicated this presentation to the millions of unsung women who loyally supported their sides and their soldiers and who bore the burdens of supplying their nation's needs and who faithfully kept their homes and families together in time of war and sorrow. When I started to research this, you go into the internet, you put in prominent women of the Civil War, and literally hundreds and hundreds of items came up from Wikipedia and whatever. So I had to sort through hundreds of stories to come up with, call them different categories of what women did, and stories that were compelling either to me or to a larger audience. And also I tried to throw in some that have some sort of a regional connection to us. So let's see what we came up with. Obviously we're going to skim over their lives, just talk about one or two things. I only have about 2.5 minutes per woman. I can come back sometime and do hundreds more if you like. So let's first talk about the people, women that were influencers. There's one you've probably all heard of, Harriet Beecher Stowe. She wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, and it sold 300,000 copies in its first year. That's equivalent to about 6 million copies today. And as far as I can tell, that number was not exceeded until Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code came out in 1993, I think it was. He did over 6 million that first year. It was an emotional, and in the United Kingdom, it sold 1.5 million. And the UK had about 35 million people then. The literacy rate was higher than the US. But that is a fantastic number of books to be sold internationally by an American author. It was an emotional portrayal of slavery, and it captured the nation's attention. She had no international copyright, so in order to monetize her foreign sales, she had to travel to the UK for lectures. And that was very helpful because it galvanized the anti-slavery movement in England, which had impact on the behavior of the British government 10 years later. Now, naturally, her book spawned anti-Tom books in the South. But in 1862, she met Lincoln, and Lincoln said to her, "So you are the little woman who wrote the book that started this great war." So a woman started the Civil War, remember that. Later in life, she was a Hartford neighbor of Mark Twain, and she died in 1896 of Alzheimer's. There's the cover of the original printing, the second highest bestseller of the 19th century. Anybody know what was number one? The Bible. So there's Simon Legree abusing Uncle Tom. It's funny, today Uncle Tom is a derisive term for a black man who acts white. But in the book, he's probably the most honest character of all, and somebody you should favorably follow. I said there was anti-Tom books. There's the best-selling anti-Tom book, Aunt Phyllis's Cabin, Southern Life as It Is. And this was a Southern propaganda about how essential and natural and uplifting slavery was to the Black race. And it was published in 1852 by Lippincott in Philadelphia. And it only sold about 20,000 copies. Our next influencer is Juliet Ward Howe. When she was 42, she and her husband came to Washington. They met with Abraham Lincoln. And the next morning she awoke from a dream with a poem in mind. It was published in February of 1862 and set to the existing melody. The Battle Hymn of the Republic became the favorite marching song of the Union Army. This hymn was controversial with a number of Christians who thought it portrayed an anti-Christian military crusade based on Revelation 19. And the United Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church USA considered removing it from their hymnals. If you look on page 534 in our Pew hymnal, you'll find it's still in Presbyterian USA hymnals. The Orthodox Presbyterian Church and others did ban it from their hymnals. It's a favorite hymn of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. There's a copy of the score. There was previous songs written to this melody, John Brown's Body, and it was an original Methodist hymn called Say Brothers, Will You Meet Us? Now here's a local influencer, Dina Hannum Mendenhall. She's born in 1807, and she and her husband Isaac were Quaker pacifists. Theirs was the first Pennsylvania stop on the Underground Railroad in Pennsbury Township. They assisted hundreds of runaway slaves coming north who went as far as Canada to get their freedom. Even they were too radical for the Quakers, and they were dismissed from Kennett Meeting, became founding members of Longwood Progressive Friends Meeting in 1853. The Quakers had a different view of women. Their intellectual skills were treated on a higher level. So when a delegation of 6 went to Washington to meet with Lincoln, she was one of the 3 men who met with Lincoln on June 20th, 1862, and urged him to end slavery. At the time, Lincoln was still involved in wanting to save the Union, whether slavery survived or not. They found Lincoln gracious, and he was non-committal. Yet a month later, he did issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So perhaps the Mendenhalls had some influence on him there. There's a picture of their house, Oakdale. It's in Pennsbury Township. I think it's on Route 52. Was their home built in 1840, and it has a secret hiding place for the Underground Railroad. And there's a picture of Longwood Progressive Friends. Sojourner Truth was among those famous women who spoke there. And you can still see the meeting house behind the firehouse at the entrance to Longwood Gardens. Now here's another influencer, Verena Howell Davis, the wife of Confederate President Jeff Davis. Now I was very surprised to find out her father's family were Pennsylvanians and her grandfather was governor of New Jersey. And Jeff Davis' wife attended a girls' boarding school, Madame Grenlow's French Seminary on 3rd Street in Philadelphia. She married Jeff Davis in 1845. She was 19 and he was age 37. You'll find marriages in those days that had lots of age difference between them. He was a widower. Many women died in childbirth. The men would remarry a younger woman and procreate some more. She held more moderate views than on secession, thinking union was sacred, and on slavery that blacks were frail human beings, not animals, as Jeff Davis believed. She was a good friend of Judah Benjamin, the Confederate Secretary of State. He was the brains of the Confederacy. They were such close friends that there was vicious gossip in Richmond about that their role went beyond collaborative to something more intimate. Her husband, ailing Jeff Davis, listened to her, unlike Mary Lincoln had virtually no input on Abe. And Verena actually signed documents and managed the day-to-day affairs of the Confederacy whenever Jeff was ill. So she was sort of a forerunner of Edith Wilson and Jill Biden. She died at 80 in New York City, where she was a friend of the Pulitzers. She spent the last 16 years of her life completing her husband's memoirs, writing a newspaper column, and trying to reconcile prominent figures from both sides of the war. There's a picture of her husband, President Davis, and that's the White House of the Confederacy, where much of the official business of the Confederate government took place. Now let's talk about some spies. We're not going to talk about Belle Boyd. We're going to start with Crazy Bet, Elizabeth Van Lew. She was born 1818 of a prosperous Richmond slave owners. She was granddaughter of a former mayor of Philadelphia, where she was educated in a Quaker school. War comes, she's in Richmond, she's a widow, and she's a unionist. She believes in gradual manumission of the slaves. So using her family fortune, she embarks on a charitable work aiding the Union prisoners at Libby Prison. These were where they kept the Union officers that were captured. And she gathered valuable information in her prison work, and she actually developed a series of moles within the Confederate government, pro-unionists that were hidden in the Confederate government, would give her all sorts of information, which she passed on to through a series of couriers to Washington. And she acted like she was touched in the head, and became known as Crazy Bet to the Richmonders, and that helped her avoid suspicion and arrest. When the Union took over Richmond at the end of the war, she was the first to raise the national flag. And President Grant eventually made her postmaster of the city of Richmond. However, she died broke, and General Paul Revere, grandson of Paul Revere of Boston, helped her financially. And in 1993, she was elected to the Spy Hall of Fame. There's a picture of Libby Prison in Richmond. There's a converted tobacco warehouse. That's where the Confederates held captured Union officers until they were exchanged. Then we have Cynthia Charlotte Moon. She's a rebel spy. She was born in Virginia. Her father was a doctor, but he moved to Ohio. And when he did, he sold the slaves. As a young woman, she was engaged to a young Union lieutenant named Ambrose Burnside, whom she actually left at the altar. Years later, General Burnside placed her under house arrest. She and her sister were pro-Southern Copperheads, and when the war came, they were based in Memphis. And she and her sister developed a courier ring that ran information and medicine to the South. She hid medicines in her hoop skirts, knowing that a lady would be unlikely to be searched in her hoop skirts by any at any roadblock. During the war, she was engaged to 12 different rebel soldiers all at once in an effort to, quote, allow them to die happily. She was somewhat of an actor, and she posed as Lady Hull, a British noblewoman, and she went to Washington and actually rode in a carriage with Lincoln and Stanton. She feigned sleep and she overheard military plans, which she passed on to Richmond. And Stanton put a $10,000 reward on her head. Post-war, she and her husband moved to New York. She had a second career as a journalist covering the Franco-Prussian War, and she died in Philadelphia in 1895. Here's a picture depicting the art of hoop skirt smuggling. You can see here they attach packets of probably morphine and laudanum and things like that to a woman's skirt. And she could, with a pass, she could go through the rebel lines to visit relatives or whatever and take the medicine to the South. And there's a picture of her jilted fiance, General Ambrose Burnside, of the famous sideburns. Now we come to another category, wives and lovers. You know, there were millions of wives left behind, North and South, who worried about their husbands on the battlefield, and I picked a few here. Frances Adams Chamberlain.
Just touch the screen beside the black and it'll go away.
I don't know what she means.
To get rid of this.
Did I get there? Franny Adams was a quiet, private person. She was married to a Bowdoin College professor of rhetoric and languages, a chair formerly held by Harriet Beecher Stowe's husband. Kind of a mild-mannered guy, professor of rhetoric and languages. Her husband Joshua comes to believe in the Union cause. He runs off to Augusta, Maine, joins the army without ever telling his wife what he was going to do. He gets appointed lieutenant colonel of the 20th Maine. He returns home and he tells her, and presumably they had a few arguments about it. They had several children at the time, and he goes off to war for 3 years, and he is severely wounded any number of times. He becomes a hero at the Battle of Gettysburg. All these absences put a strain on their marriage, and he comes back and he's a hero in Maine. He's elected governor 4 times. She almost divorces him. He's absent all the time. He's involved in these political and war-related activities. And one of his wounds was down in the groin area, and historians believe he could not fulfill his physical duties as a husband. But anyway, they stay together, and she dies in 1905 after 50 years of marriage. There's their house in Brunswick, Maine. It's now a museum, and there's a picture of Joshua Chamberlain in 1867. He was awarded the Medal of Honor in 1893 for his actions on the second day at Gettysburg on Little Round Top. Here's an interesting woman, Catherine Mary Hewitt, born in Oswego, New York, and in her 20s, she goes out to San Francisco to be a governess. That doesn't work out. So she soon ends up plying the world's oldest profession, not as a street walker, but as more of a high-class call girl. She gets involved with some gentleman, prominent gentleman, and it's splashed all over the front pages of a San Francisco newspaper. She's embarrassed to heck, and she decides she's going to go back east and join a religious order to atone for her sins. So seeking redemption, she sails for New York in July of 1860, and she meets John Reynolds on the ship. He's a Union officer, and he's heading to West Point to be the commander at West Point. They fall in love and become secret fiancés. General Reynolds is a Protestant, and Catherine is a Catholic, and in those days it was frowned upon, I guess, for religions to mix like that. He gives her his West Point ring, and she gives him a locket with her initials on it. So she enters the Eden Hall Academy of the Sacred Heart in Torresdale, Pennsylvania, and while John goes off to war. And John Reynolds rises through the ranks of the Union Army. He's in charge of the First Corps, the first day battle at Gettysburg, and a Confederate sharpshooter kills him at the beginning of the battle. His body is quickly returned to Philadelphia, and she reads about it and goes over to the Reynolds house, knocks on the door, and his sisters are thrilled to meet her. Makes her, feel very welcome. She goes to the funeral in Lancaster, but she joins the Sisters of Charity in Emmitsburg, Maryland after his death. And she eventually leaves the convent and marries and dies in 1876. There's a portrait of John Fulton Reynolds, picture of his death in McPherson's Woods while leading the First Corps against the Confederates. LaSalle Corbell Pickett, Sally Pickett. She's the teenaged fiance of General George Pickett. There's an 18-year difference. The winter of 1862, scarlet fever hits the city of Richmond because it's just crammed with soldiers from all over the South. Sanitation's poor. General Longstreet, who's one of Pickett's friends, 3 of his 4 kids die of scarlet fever. And he and his wife are so consumed with grief that they can't even arrange for the funeral of the 3 kids. So George Pickett and Sally Pickett take care of the whole thing. They arrange the ceremony, the burial, and whatever. After the war, Pickett becomes one of the few Southerners who's critical of Robert E. Lee, with justification. And if you've ever heard of the Lost Cause, after Lee died, Southern historians and sympathizers and apologists began this lost cause that the South only lost because the North was so powerful and Robert E. Lee was like the greatest general ever. So somebody like George Pickett, who was critical of Lee, especially for having him destroyed at Pickett's charge, Sally Pickett takes up his cause, and for years after his death, she was his chief supporter and propagandist, writing a dozen books and magazine articles and touring America as a lecturer. much like Libby Custer did with her husband. She died in 1931. Most of us have parents who were probably alive and when she was still alive. When Pickett died in 1875, he was buried in Hollywood Cemetery with other Confederate soldiers. In 1931, Hollywood Cemetery still would not allow the burial of wives with their soldier husbands. So she was buried in a separate cemetery until 1998. They finally relented and allowed wives to be buried with their soldier husbands, and she was moved next to him and his soldiers. There's a picture of the headstone of the 3 Longstreet children. They died from scarlet fever in early 1862. Civilian victims of the wartime spread of diseases. And we talk about 650,000 people killed in the Civil War. There were probably 200,000 more civilians who died as a result of diseases and things like that, starvation caused by the war. So the actual total of the Civil War was more in the neighborhood of 800,000 people. Now here's a wife of what you might call a common soldier, Philinda Humiston. She's a New Yorker, and she was a widow of Joseph Smith's cousin, Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church. She remarries, and her husband goes off to war with the New York Regiment, and like many wives, she doesn't know what happened to him. She just doesn't hear from him anymore. Well, he's dead on the Gettysburg battlefield. On the first day, he was killed, and his body lays in town. Reb soldiers stripped him of all identification. They had no idea who this man was. But in his hand, he had an ambrotype, a picture of 3 little kids. And that's all. I guess when they stripped his body, somebody said, let's not take his picture. So a doctor from Philadelphia saw the picture in a tavern, and he had it published in the Philadelphia papers. And all across the North, the search was on for the family of the soldier, this unknown soldier. And the Portville, New York Presbyterian Church included it in their Sunday bulletin where Philinda saw it. And the American Presbyterian Magazine raised funds for an orphanage in Gettysburg after the war. And Philinda and her children, they were almost destitute. They moved in. Her son Frank later became a doctor, aided by the funds that were earned from the sale of the ambrotype. There's a picture of it. The Franklin, Frederick, and Alice grasped in his hands, dead on the battlefield. Sergeant Amos Humiston, 154th New York Infantry. He's now buried in the National Cemetery at Gettysburg with his name, not with unknown. So that's a wife who, more of a common soldier who suffered. Tens of thousands of women never found out what happened to their husbands or their brother. They were shoveled into mass graves when the battle was over, and the army moved on. Nobody knew who was who. There's a picture of the orphans' homestead in Gettysburg. They lived there for almost 5 years. That building is still there. I think it's now headquarters for some ghost tours, as a matter of fact. Now we come to one of the lovers, Jessie Helen Kissack Peters. She was a 25-year-old lover of a notorious womanizer, Confederate General Van Dorn. And Van Dorn was shot by her jealous husband, George Peters, who was 51 years old. There's that 20+ gap again. Van Dorn was shot in his headquarters in Spring Hill, Tennessee. And George Peters was arrested, but he was never charged with murder. Southern sense of honor, a wronged husband could kill his wife's lover and get away with it. He was a very skilled Confederate general, and his death was a severe blow to their chance in the Western theater. Her daughter, Medora, was born in January of 1864 and is widely believed to be Van Dorn's child. After this, her husband divorced her, but they later remarried and had 6 children. The lower picture there is a picture of her in old age, and they were going to make a movie of this or a TV show or something, and somebody did a picture of what she probably looked like at 25. And here's a picture, though, of Van Dorn. And he was actually known in the papers as the terror of ugly husbands. And there's a picture of her husband, George Peters, who was acquitted of murdering Van Dorn. Now we come to women on the battlefield. Historians think that up to 1,000 women disguised themselves as men and fought on the battlefield. First, we want to look at French Mary Tepe. She was born in France, French-Turkish descent, and she married a Philadelphia tailor named Bernard Tepe. When the war came, Bernard enlisted in the 27th Pennsylvania, and she enlisted with him. She became a vivandière, which is a term for a woman sutler. She was more than somebody with a wagon. She actually lived with a regiment. She would sell them notions, do sewing, sell them shots of rum and this sort of thing. And within a year, she had accumulated over $1,000. And her husband and his buddies stole the money. Took the woman's money. It's been done before. And she was so angry, she left that regiment and she joined 114th Pennsylvania College's Zouaves. She was one of only 2 women who were given the Kearny Cross for courageous service. She earned that at the Battle of Fredericksburg. And there's a picture of her. There's only a few in existence. You can see she has her rum barrel and her pistol, and there's her medal. Unlike most vivandières, she actually went out on the field, tended to the wounded men during the battle. In May 1901, she was destitute, having been denied a military pension, and she committed suicide in Pittsburgh. She drank a concoction of Paris green, which was some rodenticide that they used to mix in paint and things like that. There's the only known photo of her on an actual battlefield that was taken 4 or 5 days after the Battle of Gettysburg. You can see her there leaning against a fence post. There's a more enhanced photo I didn't use, but I wanted to use this one because you'll notice here there's this tent on the battlefield. Historians or photographers have pulled that image up, and that's an embalmer's tent. The Army didn't embalm you, they buried you. If you wanted your loved one embalmed and sent home, you had to hire a private embalmer. And apparently within a couple days after the battle, an embalmer had set up shop already in Gettysburg. Here's another one of our battlefield women, Jenny Irene Hodgers, born in Ireland. She enlisted in October '62 with the 95th Illinois and fought in as many as 40 battles. Wow. 5'3". She was quiet. She kept to herself. Probably visited the latrines at night. She was one of the boys and, quote, a good soldier. She continued to live as a man after the war, working in male occupations, voting, and collecting a veteran's pension. Her true sex was not discovered until 1910 while being treated for a broken leg. She was then declared insane. Her war comrades, while shocked, insisted she be buried in 1915 in uniform and with her male name and military affiliation on her tombstone. That's a picture of one of the biggest battles she was in. And you've probably never heard of it, and most Civil War buffs may have heard the name but know nothing about that battle. Her regiment lost a third of its soldiers in a victory led by General Nathan Bedford Forrest. I say unknown because, and it shouldn't be, because the Union Army in this battle actually lost more men than the U.S. Army lost on Omaha Beach on D-Day. Yet you've never heard of this. Everybody's heard of D-Day. So Private Cashier was in that battle. There's a picture of her grave markers in Livingston County, Illinois. In the back, it has her male name and her female name. And then in front, a more recent headstone with just her name and her affiliation. Let's look at women in business. Well, there's one you've probably heard of, Mary Surratt. After her husband's death in 1862, Mary, who was a Maryland slave owner and a Confederate sympathizer, moved into the boarding house that they had operated in Washington since 1853. And Washington was packed to the gills. You needed boarding houses. So she provided lodging. It wasn't an upscale place. It was more blue collar working class. Her son, John Jr., was deeply involved in clandestine Confederate activities, meeting with spies and couriers. And several of the Lincoln assassination conspirators, Azerrad, Lewis Powell, and David Harold, stayed at her boarding house from time to time. And Booth met there with his fellow conspirators, perhaps, they don't really know, with Mary's invitation. The testimony at the trials implicated Mary in the plot, and she was sentenced to death. Feelings ran very high at this time, and they weren't going to let her off. There's a picture of her boarding house in 1890, and today it's the Walk and Roll Restaurant. It's on 8th Street if you're in Washington. There's a picture of the hanging of Mary Surratt, July 7th, 1865, inside the prison yard at Fort McNair. She was the first woman executed by the U.S. government. Does anybody know who the second was? It was almost 80 years later, Ethel Rosenberg, the Soviet nuclear spy. Here's an interesting woman, Elizabeth Hobbs Keckley. She was born enslaved. She married another slave and they were separated forever when the owner moved away. She was an accomplished seamstress, so she eventually earned enough pocket money to purchase her freedom and her sons. And in 1855, she moved to Washington, D.C. She became the dressmaker to society. Her business employed 20 seamstresses and served an elite clientele, including Jeff Davis's wife, Irena, and Robert E. Lee's wife, Mariana. She became the personal dressmaker and confidant to Mary Lincoln during and after the war, and both had lost sons during the Civil War. You may remember at the beginning of Lincoln's term, Mary Lincoln went to New York and went on a wild spending spree. She spent his entire salary for the year in one trip to New York, dressmakers and everything. And Abe put his foot down, and she started to patronize the less expensive dressmaker in Washington. So Elizabeth Keckley wrote an autobiography in 1868, one of the first ever by a Black woman author. It was controversial because it disclosed embarrassing information about the Lincolns' personal life, mostly how crazy Mary was. Their son, one living son, Robert Lincoln, used his influence to stop additional printings. Talk about censorship. As a member of the 15th Street Presbyterian Church, she led the Freeman's relief efforts and founded a home for destitute colored women where she died in 1907. There's a picture of Mary Lincoln in one of her dresses. And there's another Keckley dress made for Mary Lincoln that you can see in the Smithsonian. Now here's an ordinary worker named Mary Ryan, an 18-year-old arsenal worker in Richmond. There were 600 employed there, mostly Irish and German immigrants. Many were under the age of 20. And what happened is there was an explosion on March 13th, 1863, 31 dead, half under the age of 17, and 25 were injured. Mary Ryan was packing fuses for the cannon, and they came in wooden boxes. They were upright, and she had to take them out, and one got stuck in the box. So she tapped the box on a table. The spark ignited the powder in the air and blew the hell out of the arsenal in Richmond. So there's a picture of women packing cartridges. There's a photo of the destroyed Richmond arsenal after the Union got done with Richmond in 1865. Miraculously, they had the arsenal back in service within a month. So there were tens of thousands of people like Mary Ryan, ordinary workers. The Union's major clothing depot was in Philadelphia, Schuylkill Arsenal, down on Grays Ferry Avenue. And it alone employed 50,000 women seamstresses to make uniforms for the Union Army. Most of it was done in the home and was delivered there, but 50,000 women were making Union uniforms. We come to the Angels of Mercy. First is Mother Mary Ann Bickerdike. She was a widowed botanic physician from Galesburg, Illinois. Responding to a plea for supplies, she traveled to Cairo, Illinois, and saw the filthy conditions in the hospitals. She became an agent for the U.S. Sanitary Commission. She was known for her assertive ways in providing care for the sick and wounded. Her authority was questioned by a male surgeon, and she answered that her authority came from Lord God Almighty. She was widely known and respected from General Grant down to the lowest private as Mother Bickerdike and Mother of the Boys in Blue. The end of the war, General Sherman had her ride at the front of the 15th Corps in the post-war Grand Review in Washington, D.C. That was quite an honor to do that. She was present for 19 battles as agent of the U.S. Sanitary Commission. She established about 300 medical posts. After the war, she became an attorney. She helped veterans with legal problems and obtaining pensions. In World War II, there was a hospital ship named the USS Bickerdike. There's a picture of a typical U.S. Sanitary Commission facility. It was a private organization and raised $500 million in today's money, had 15,000 women volunteers, and Dorothea Dix was the director of it. Now we have Cordelia Adelaide Harvey, the Wisconsin Angel. She was married to a fellow teacher, Lewis Harvey, who became Wisconsin's 7th governor. He went on a tour to visit Wisconsin soldiers along the Mississippi, and he drowned in an accident in 1862. So widowed, she took up Sanitary Commission tasks of administering to the wounded and sick troops in the Western theater of the war. She actually convinced Lincoln and Stanton that convalescing troops should be moved closer to their homes. The hospitals used to be at the front, and soldiers could be, 1,000 miles away from loved ones. And she discovered that you would recover quicker and more frequently if you were near friends and family that could visit you and bring you, treats and be at your side and everything. So she convinced Lincoln and that hospitals should be in their home states. After the war, she established an orphanage in Madison, Wisconsin, that found homes for almost 1,000 children. So there's the hospital that she started in Madison, Wisconsin, that became the Soldiers' Orphanage. Phoebe Yates Pember, she's on the Confederate side. She was born to wealthy Jewish parents in Charleston. Another woman who was widowed by the war, and the wife of the Confederate Secretary of War asked her to be the chief matron at Chimborazo Hospital in Richmond, which is one of the largest in the world. She was in charge of nursing. She was not medically trained, but she was an excellent administrator. And as such, she was responsible for up to 17,000 patients at one time. A strong woman, she fought corruption, thievery of medical supplies, and general disdain for women being in charge of anything. On the black market, medicines and things like that were very valuable, and she developed ways to fight that sort of corruption. She's understood to, quote, have a will of steel under a suave refinement. She served through the surrender, and she died in Pittsburgh in 1913. There's a picture of Chimborazo Hospital in Richmond. They had beds for 17,000 wounded and ill soldiers. You can see they're like this wooden barracks sort of thing. Very primitive, but better than being out on the field. And lastly, right on time, Mary Edwards Walker. She was one of the first women to receive a medical degree in the United States, getting it from Syracuse Medical College. She served as a nurse at the first battle at Bull Run. She later became the first surgeon in the United States Army, serving with the Army of the Cumberland. She refused to wear traditional women's clothing, in other words, skirts. She wore pants. The skirts would have restricted her work on the battlefield. In 1864, she was arrested by the Confederates because she was behind their lines. And what was she doing? She was helping a Confederate doctor with an amputation. For whatever reason, she was imprisoned for 5 months before being exchanged. To this date, she's the only woman to ever receive the Congressional Medal of Honor. Sadly, it was rescinded in 1917, along with 900 others. Most of the others were Medals of Honor given out in the Indian Wars for atrocities committed by the cavalry. But President Carter restored her Medal of Honor in 1977. So to this day, even with women serving in Afghanistan and places like that, she's still the only woman to ever win the Congressional Medal of Honor. And there she is, looks kind of proud, and it's on her tunic. There's a picture of nurses on the battlefield, the aftermath of battle. An estimated 40,000 women served as nurses on both sides during the Civil War, including free and enslaved Black women. That is the end of those 20. Any questions and comments?
Why did they rescind Walker's Medal of Honor? Just because she's a woman?
During the Indian Wars and even during the Civil War, they started giving out Medals of Honor almost like candy at Halloween. And there was a commission during World War I that went through and decided that Medals of Honor were given out for things that acts that weren't where you put your life in danger to save others. And for some reason, they got rid of hers. She was on the battlefield many times, putting her life in danger, and they started to give some of those Medals of Honor back in later years. They're still giving Medals of Honor for the Civil War now. I think President Obama gave one posthumously, obviously, to Lieutenant Cushing, who manned his cannon there at the Bloody Angle at Gettysburg on the third day against Pickett's charge, and he just got it in 2012. So they're still reviewing lots of them. There's still, you've heard of the massacre at Wounded Knee. There's still 20 Medals of Honor given to cavalrymen then that probably should be rescinded that haven't been. But anyway, there's still a commission that looks into that. Name.
Was she still alive when it was rescinded?
Good question. Did I have when she died? Somebody look it up on their phone quick. The medal was rescinded in 1917. When did Mary Edwards Walker die? So I think we've seen that women played a hidden role in the Civil War, and from that time forward, of course, women were shoved into the background again after the war, but they had proven their worth, and the women's suffrage movement really took off. It still took what, 70 years.
1919.
So she was still alive for 2 years.
In Oswego, New York.
Yeah. So she still was alive when it was rescinded. Anything else?
Great.
Dave, you've given many talks, but I don't remember your professional background and how you got interested in history.
Well, in high school, I wanted to be a history teacher. And to be a history teacher in Pennsylvania, you had to go to one of the state schools like Westchester to get your teacher's certificate. And one of the requirements was you had to have 2 years of a foreign language. And I had taken French and I had flunked it. I couldn't pick up French, so I couldn't get into teachers college. That rule, of course, was rescinded a few years later, but by that time I was at Drexel and getting into the accountancy. So my career was in accounting and finance rather than history. So once I retired, I decided to write a book and get back into this sort of thing. I'm working on 2 for the group for next year. One, my son and I are going to do a Voices of the Founding Fathers in January. And in February, I'm doing Bayard Rustin, born in Westchester, organizer of the March on Washington for Martin Luther King.
Any other comments, questions? Well, Dave, thank you for your 14th amazing and a valuable service to our Tuesday morning fellowship. Your presentations are always enlightening, always enlightening.
Good.
And enjoy them
Once
very
they
much.
aren't, tell me and I'll stop.
Well, I think you have a long time ahead of you on preparing presentations for us, because you're always on top of it. And I think if I recall right, I think there's been some occasions where David, Goodell, who is our overseer of organizing the schedule and putting speakers together, if we've had a speaker that drop out at one time, Dave contacts Dave and says, hey, you got one you can do in a couple, we lost a speaker. And he says, yeah, I can do one of those. He says, I got something I can talk about. So very much appreciated, Dave, for your presentation skills and how you put them together. And they're not, at least for me, they're not boring. So very much appreciated. So thank you very much. And we look forward to the upcoming 2 in the second semester of the Tuesday morning fellowships next year, which won't be far away. You know, we're almost to the end of October, 2 more months left. Pretty soon we'll be in the Advent season and getting into the Christmas season. So with that, go home, rake your leaves, enjoy the beautiful day. Thank you.